for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, I'd like to ask you a question first. My friend, Mr. Johnson, said that all of a sudden the Democrats are having this hearing because they want to beat up on Clarence Thomas. When did you first introduce this bill?
First introduced this bill in the 116th Congress 2 years ago.
That was quite a bit before all this controversy about Justice Thomas and his wife, right?
Yes, it was, and actually, I took this bill up from the late Louise Slaughter, representative from New York, who first introduced the legislation in the year 2013. I thought it was an important piece of legislation then, and I think it's even more important now.
It is, and you got ahead of me on this one.
Well, sometimes
Good
you
work.
have seniority over me because of your initials, so that it feels good.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Roth, let me ask you a question. Take me back a bit. Mr. Thomas, Justice Thomas was first put on the court in 1991, is that correct?
Correct.
When was the first time he ever spoke in the Supreme Court and asked a question?
I know that he was famous for not asking questions during oral argument because he did not find it a valuable exercise for him to take that time. But I remember being in the courtroom on a leap day when he asked a question. So that would have been February 29th, 2016. And I think he asked questions in 08 or 09. But it wasn't a common occurrence until the seriatim questions were implemented in 2020.
So it was a long time. And when did Justice Scalia die?
February 13th, 2016.
He started talking more after Justice Scalia died, maybe?
Well, I think the question he asked when I was in the courtroom definitely echoed something that Justice Scalia would have asked. It was about domestic violence and guns, and it had some echo there, which I thought was a nice homage to the late justice. But a few years later, because of the pandemic, we're doing live audio, and every justice gets to ask a question, and Clarence Thomas has decided to participate in that, and he's asked a question at pretty much every hearing since May 2020.
Most every justice does ask questions, do they not?
Correct.
Has there ever been anybody, other than the movie Silent Bob, has there ever been a justice like Clarence Thomas?
It's the hot bench of the Supreme Court where there's this back and forth of the justices, that dates back to 50 or 60 years ago. I really don't know what happened before that. I don't have a good sense.
Okay, thank you, sir. It just astonished me, Mr. Paoletta. I heard you say something to the effect, I think what your written testimony says now, 30 years later, Thompson is still standing strong, considered by many to be our greatest justice. Who are the many?
I'll get you a number of Tom Goldstein.
Tom who?
Tom Goldstein, a practitioner before, it said Justice Thomas is considered our greatest justice for bringing new ideas into the court. I find it, so let me just ask you a question, Congressman. Do you think that his not asking questions?
Wait a minute, sir. I've got, many is plural. Tom Goldstein's not a triplet.
I've spoken with many practitioners who say he's our greatest justice. So I can give you a list.
Give me a list, I'm ready.
Would the gentleman yield? I would be glad to add my name to that list whenever it's delivered.
I join.
Thank you. I was giving y'all are given. The fact is, this doesn't have to do with Clarence Thomas. It doesn't have to do with Ms. Ginsburg. It has to do with ethics. And I think everybody should agree the Supreme Court, which is the most powerful institution in our government, should have ethical guidelines. And if they have conflicts, they should recuse themselves or they should disclose them. And there have been instances shown where justices have had conflicts and they haven't recused and they haven't disclosed. Now, most of what we talked about, Justice Ginsburg and this Ninth Circuit gentleman whose wife was on the ACLU, nobody got paid any money. But regardless of all that, if there are conflicts, they should disclose them, and there should be such laws. Justice Scalia came before when I was chairman of this subcommittee and talked to us, and he was big on OIRA, and it couldn't be a nicer witness we ever had. Scalia was a gentleman and a scholar, and he taught us a lot, and he cared about OIRA, and he cared about the court. He came with Breyer, and the two got along great. Breyer could have been Ginsburg. They were just all buddy-buddy and wonderful.
Will the gentleman yield?
Who was it that asked? Sure, you go ahead.
I would also just make the observation that there's been a conservative majority on the Supreme Court since approximately 1972, when Nixon got 4 appointments. So the idea that somehow we are all of a sudden raising issues of ethics because there is a conservative majority on the Supreme Court is plainly belied by the facts. And I think we should dispense with making those representations moving forward if we want to be held favorably in the eyes of people who want to judge all of the information in a neutral fashion.
Thank you. I'll close, but the bottom line is we ought to have ethics, and I don't care what anybody did wrong. That doesn't make what somebody else did right, and it doesn't change the fact the Supreme Court ought to be honest and disclose it. And I'm a big fan of Justice Roberts, too. Aye.